Hey guys, welcome to episode 1 of Social Talks. Social Talks is a 3-episode talk show series organized by IMU Drama Club, and in each episode, we'll feature one topic of choice. Today's topic of choice is domestic violence. I'm your MC, and I'm Samanthal Yap. So, for today's guest, we have brought in a representative of WAO, and she's also the ambassador for 2021. She currently works as a freelance consultant in brands and communication. And with that, please welcome Ms. Joyce Lai.
What role do you exactly play in the WAO?
So in WAO, I am an ambassador where we do community engagement, and also, for example, conduct awareness programs like these. And also, as a crisis support officer, I actually, take on calls on the hotline. So that's what I do.
Okay, so from what I've read about you online, you're quite a successful woman in the industry. So during your time in the industry, did you ever experience any gender inequality or disrespectfulness?
Well, my career path took me on quite a male-dominated, industries, several of them, and it is no doubt that sometimes, when you go for a big meeting or you're attending a big event and you're maybe the one or the two women in the room, so it can be quite intimidating. But don't get me wrong. I mean, I've had a phenomenal experience and opportunity, but I did over the years did feel that sometimes being a woman I had to work maybe extra hard to prove myself, or to get the promotion, to be heard, for example. So sometimes, women in the workplace, when you have a situation and you bring it up, and then problem solving, but maybe they see you as or you're complaining, so it's a kind of like a different different. If I was a man and I brought the problem up, maybe it would have been a different received differently, I would say. Yeah. So yes, there were some, again, maybe because of how society is, but there is no doubt that I had a very good experience, in my career.
So do you feel like current society, we are a lot on feminism, equal rights and all those, right? But a lot of times nowadays, people use feminism as an excuse to maybe belittle men. Maybe say like, oh, a woman can do that too, it's not that special, things like that. Like, what is your take on this?
Well, I think it is a misconception in the first place because that people think that feminism is about women wanting to be men, right? And it is actually not the same thing, because what women want, what we are trying to do today, is to ensure, that there is to bridge the gender gap, where there is equality. The equality means that there's equal opportunities, equal resources, equal protections, and for example, things like equal pay, equal employment opportunities, even equal promotion opportunities, for that matter, right? So that's what we are about. It's not about women wanting to be exactly like men.
On to the main topics. Could you tell us what exactly is domestic violence?
Okay, so domestic violence is about power and control in a relationship within a household, right? Now, the abuser would try to gain control over the other person, right? And during this time, these violence can be expressed in different ways. It can be, for example, in the form of a physical violence, emotional abuse, psychological, even social abuse, like limiting or isolation, preventing the person from having a social support, from a financial perspective, for example, not allowing any monetary allowances, or not allowing her to spend any money. So it's kind of like you're making her a little bit helpless in her environment, and so she has basically no support and no resources, right? Then there is also the digital or technology abuse, where it could be in the form of harassment, or recording without your consent. So there are many forms of abuse that comes in expressed in different ways.
Okay, so are there any signs that we can keep out for, like to know what these are going on?
Well, okay, signs are not always obvious. It's common for a person who is being abused to feel like it is their fault, or to feel like they are to be blamed. The reason for this is because during the abusive experience, what the abuser does is actually through the emotional and psychological tactics, right? They would belittle them, humiliate them, and call them names, and that attacks at their self-worthiness. So what happens during this time is that the survivor becomes like, because you see, for example, the abuser would use words like, you're so stupid, right? And you're so ugly, you're so fat, or that kind of really humiliating kind of words. So over time, or you're so useless, you don't know how to do anything, you're always late. So all these kind of communication and language use would actually affect the person over a period of time, and then they tend to believe that, yeah, I am really useless, right? So from the survivor point of view, you will find that they're obviously in a very low self-esteem. They would be helpless, in despair. They might have abusing drugs or alcohol to help them cope with the situation. They would be maybe in the if they experience physical abuse, then there would be maybe injuries that they will try to cover up, heavy makeup, or they wear something to cover their face or arm or something like this. So there's some of the signs. The emotional abuse are quite difficult, to spot, because because when you look at a person, there's no sign that says walking around like I am being abused, for example. But those are very small signs, and sometimes because of the shame, the guilt, they actually put up a like a front, to hide from revealing their current situation.
So if a victim wants to seek help, what measures could she take?
Okay, so if a survivor wants to seek help, in the first place is reach out to an organization like WAO, for example. So we have a 24-hour support line, and in the event, because we always prioritize safety of a survivor, so in the event if it's not safe, then we would determine or arrange a time where it is safe to call, and she could talk safely, for example, especially if there are children involved. Find a support, find a friend that you could talk to, maybe even identify a safe place where the survivor can actually go to in the event she needs to escape from the violent environment, for example. Of course, collect evidence, like photographs, screenshots, chronology or frequency of when what is happening, and in the event of necessity, of course, police reporting, calling 999, because if your life is in danger, you would need to call for help. So those are some of the things that immediately a person could do. However, in situations mostly, to be able to have somebody to confide into, whether is it a helpline like WAO, or a good friend that you could share and trust to speak to, those are the first steps that a survivor could do.
So when we approach a victim of domestic violence, are we allowed to ask about their experience?
Well, we should be very, very sensitive, because we do not know who is or was, a survivor of abuse, and in actual fact, it should be you do not ask someone outright, like whether are you, were you, have you, kind of situation. It's always a case of the survivor feeling confident enough, or that respected enough, or comfortable enough to actually speak up about her experience. So, for example, like me as a crisis support officer, when survivors call the helpline, there are times that they are not even comfortable in divulging their names, their actual names, for example. So it's only through time, and maybe depending on what they have gone through, because that level of trust, of the fear of maybe the abuser finding out that she's trying to get help, all that kind of thing comes into play. So that's the reason why for this hesitance. On top of all that is also about the guilt and the shame, that if people know, if my friends know, my family know, that so that shame and that guilt is being carried, because through the whole abusive experience, she would have been told that it's all her fault. You're so slow, you're so stupid, that's why we're late all the time. So it psychologically, she thinks that, okay, it's my fault, so it's my fault, and hence, given that kind of feeling, and she were to go to a friend and, let's say, shares this situation, she will feel so ashamed that because of my stupidity, I put myself in this situation. So and she's afraid that how that is going to affect her relationship, let's say, with her friends or her family.
So, the effects of domestic violence can be at times scarring both mentally and physically. So, are there any ways for the victim to hopefully approach the scars and in time heal from them?
Yeah, the effects of domestic violence and the healing process, is a journey by itself. It is psychologically damaging due to all of the points I mentioned earlier. Particularly, for example, in children, sometimes the effects are actually lingering, because from that, when they are growing up, it could affect them in many ways. Although not all, children who were in abusive environment follow a destructive path when they grow up, but they could be triggers, on them psychologically. For example, things like flashbacks, nightmares, post-traumatic stress disorder, reliving the trauma, all these could be triggered when asked, or when they are speaking about the experience. They would, maybe start crying and get really emotional, because it just makes them go through, like they're reliving the whole thing all over again, or even watching a violent episode on TV, for example. To get help, definitely professional help, like counseling services, mental, well-being and support agencies would offer professional guidance, because it would take time, and they would have to go through certain programs, for them to come out slowly out of what they've gone through, because of the lack of self-worth and dependency that resulted from years and years of abuse, for example. They need time to believe in their self and their ability. So WAO's programs, like such as the upskills, would actually help them cope, like become financially independent. They would learn a new skill, and then they would monetize that skill, and then they would earn a living, and then they will feel their worthiness, and they'll be able to move forward and go out into the society again.
Okay, so there are times where survivors of sexual and gender-based violence keep silent. from shame and or are very vulnerable to victim blaming. So what can you tell us about these?
Okay, in an act of violence, we have to ask ourselves what comes to your mind, what comes to the minds of our audiences here today. Who is responsible? Now, would you think, why did she choose this kind of guy? Why is she still with him? What did she do? What did she say? She must have said something, to provoke him. Okay, so this is one thought, that comes to mind. Now, or do these thoughts come to your mind? For example, boys will be boys, men, they can't control themselves, that is normalizing the behavior. All right. Now, then there is another thought where I'm so sorry for what you're going through. He's such a violent man. He deserves, to be put in jail. It is a criminal. How can I help you? Right. So these are thoughts that flashes through at any one point, depending on your cultural background, your traditional beliefs, and sometimes what maybe the media has been playing, in the movies. The defense is always talking down to the survivor that it is her fault. It is her fault. It is her fault, right? So, and because sometimes subconsciously, because of the day-to-day, unconscious social bias that gets planted into our minds, we may just react and say, what do you do? Instead, and because of that, right, the survivor already feel that I am to be blamed. Now is confirming that I am to be blamed, right? So these thoughts and these questions are something that we, like yourselves, this program, and WAO, would advocate to increase awareness about, where, to be more conscious about our day-to-day bias, because of our maybe background, our subconscious mind that gets implanted with all these what do you call that, gender stereotyping. So yeah, so if we are conscious of that, then this victim blaming scenario would maybe would be less, and then the victim would have be able to come forward. More victims or survivors will be able to come forward with their stories, and not feel that they would be in fear of shame and guilt.
Okay, so when it comes to domestic violence, there are other victims aside from women. So how should these people find help if they call the WAO? What would the WAO do?
Well, okay, so there are survivors who are not women, and because WAO is providing services to mainly women and children, so what we would do is we would connect them to other, for example, counseling or depending on what need they require, because if it's like what to do, we may also, if we are able to, guide them to go through police reporting or whatever they may be. But other than that, there's also Talian Kase, which is the government helpline, or advise them to go to maybe, for example, the hospital emergency if they require medical attention, or other mental and counseling services, because WAO, for example, like me, I'm a crisis support officer as a first responder to a crisis call, but I'm not a trained counselor, for example.